Right. Well, when President Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender, as you point out, we've been into Bitcoin since 2011. We first started recommending it when it was $1. And so we've been tracking this industry now quite closely for a long time. And it was always some speculation about which country would be the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, and El Salvador was that country. And so I felt it was incumbent upon me and Stacy to go there, to move there, to be a part of this revolution, to be in a country where Bitcoin is legal tender. That this is the frontier at the moment, and we like to be always at the bleeding edge of Bitcoin. As you point out, El Zonte or Bitcoin Beach is ground zero for Bitcoin adoption and hyper-Bitcoinization. So people are being paid in Bitcoin, they're using Bitcoin, they're saving in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is becoming a unit of account. It's becoming really the form of money for that town and nearby towns. San Salvador, the capital, a lot of Bitcoin going on as well around the country. If you look at a heat map, Bitcoin wallets, you see high concentration in El Zonte, you see concentration in San Salvador, and then you start to see it around the country popping up every single day. So awareness of Bitcoin is extremely high. It's on the front page of the newspaper often. It's being talked about by the president often. We talk about it on our media outlets a lot. And so awareness is there. Adoption is definitely in towns like El Zonte almost ubiquitous. And so fund El Zonte Capital. So this is my third Bitcoin related VC fund. Simon Dixon and I started Bitcoin Capital, a VC fund back in 2013, which was really the first dedicated venture capital fund at the time. And we started that in 2013 with an investment in BitPay, which was at that time the very first company really to be launched in the Bitcoin space. And then I also started Heisenberg Capital, which has been making Bitcoin investments as well, like in Casa and Swan Bitcoin. But El Zonte Capital will be really focused on Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization, as we see it in El Salvador, as well as Bitcoin maximalism. So I think Bitcoin maximalism is coming into its own now. People are understanding more about what that means. And I think I'm pushing for El Zonte and El Salvador to get more formal recognition of Bitcoin maximalism work in the world. So everything else, whether it's fiat money, CBDCs, gold, or altcoins, are all either absolutely or relatively centralized as compared to Bitcoin. And decentralization is the unique quality that makes Bitcoin revolutionary because it exists outside of any central control. It exists outside of any state control, of any group or corporate control, and therefore it exists in as pure money. It's virtually perfect money, where the transaction value of Bitcoin is determined entirely by by the market, so to speak. So this is unique. This doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's as such, it's pulling away from the rest of any competitor or any system that suggests that it might compete with Bitcoin. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of losers. Stephan, you've got the fiat money world is in total chaos. The dollar and the euro are really suffering epic, epoch-defining collapses at the moment. I'm sure I'm not telling any secrets here. It's pretty obvious what's going on in the fiat money world. In gold, as you see, there's no real price discovery. Either the code base has changed often, or you've got, it's driven by a cult of personality. It's just many forms of centralization you see in the altcoin space. None are truly decentralized. And just as an interesting side point, I saw a headline just cross the last couple of days that the EU has come out and said we need to attack Bitcoin and support Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum is kind of the second most well-known in this space, and it's clearly not decentralized. It's clearly not money. It's clearly an exit scam, and it's clearly the pet of the central bankers around the world. And it should be clear at this point, as Michael Saylor said in a Real Vision interview last year, altcoins, including Ethereum, you'd have to say that they're both unethical and immoral to support these projects. It goes beyond just failed projects. It's actually immoral to support them. And I think people need to realize that when they support these altcoins, including Ethereum, they're really acting in an unethical, immoral way. Now, let me talk about something kind of more philosophical to kick this off. So, because one of the attributes of Bitcoin is that it's unconfiscatable, that means that for somebody to build up a Bitcoin position, they can't rely on the old tried and true method of coercion or violence, right? Typically, the way empires are built or the way wealth is created is through violence and war. Countries or corporations. One of the side issues being discussed, of course, with El Salvador is that it's been the victim of American violence and CIA violence for decades because they are stealing the resources of that country and all over Central America. But this is not unique to El Salvador or Central America. The U.S. is doing this all over the world. And so violence and war are part and parcel with fiat money. So fiat money is something you can print really without constraint to fund your violence and your war. And with Bitcoin, because it's unconfiscatable, to accumulate more Bitcoin, you have confiscatable wealth we've ever had as humans. You know, when the book came out, Bitcoin and Black America by Isaiah Jackson, he points out in the first chapter that he heard about Bitcoin on my show, Keiser Report, back in the early 2012 period, and immediately recognized that this is a great benefit to the Black community in America, because the Black community in America has, over years, almost by definition, they've had their wealth confiscated. You know, this is one of the problems in the Black community, and he saw this as unconfiscatable wealth. And that's why adoption in America by the Black community is extraordinarily high. I think it's the highest group in America is Black American adoption of Bitcoin, for one of the simple reasons that, you know, it's unconfiscatable wealth. So that's something new for Black America. They actually can accumulate wealth now without having it stolen from them. But that's true all over the world. So philosophically, Bitcoin promotes war. It promotes peace. It promotes altruism in a lot of ways. And so philosophically, it changes the world. When people talk about Bitcoin using a lot of energy, you know, the answer to that is compared to what? You know, the fiat money world, because it supports war, because it supports the prison industrial complex, high amount of carbon emissions associated with fiat money. By eliminating fiat money, carbon emissions would drop enormously, you know, 70, 80%, and almost immediately, because you're getting rid of the worst carbon offenders in the world. The Pentagon, the war machine, the fraud, the corruption, the waste. So philosophically, those are some of the high level top line changes that Bitcoin can bring about once a global Bitcoin standard comes in, Hyperbitcoinization comes in. And I think we see it in El Salvador. You know, I always say that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And after less than a year after making Bitcoin legal tender, the government exported to El Salvador from the United States. So so they're cleaning up America's trash effectively, and they're doing so very effectively because Bitcoin changes the way you think. You become intolerant of violence. You become intolerant of war because you want to live a Bitcoin life. And this playing out right now in El Salvador. If other countries, and when other countries adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, they will also follow what El Salvador is doing and become intolerant of violence and intolerant of war. That's why it would be great if America became a Bitcoin standard, because they would stop their wars of convenience in various countries and focus on being better global citizens at home.